Speaker, and I rise to speak on the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Amendment Bill and note the Coalition will not be opposing this bill. The bill seeks to amend the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act of 1988 to ensure that it is stronger and can be more effective to protect Victoria's biodiversity in the face of existing and emerging threats such as climate change. The bill seeks to amend the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act by inserting revised objectives and principles of the Act, imposing additional obligations to consider biodiversity in decision-making, improving transparency and accountability, and making various other amendments to strengthen the Act. So while the bill has broad support, I do want to draw the House's attention to some key issues that are being faced in my electorate in relation to vegetation and community safety. I'm concerned that the flagged additional obligation to consider biodiversity in decision-making may compound these issues further. Following the fires on St Patrick's Day, the issue of roadside vegetation has been raised with myself and I'm sure the member for Polwarth on several occasions by many people, including the captain of the local CFA at Macarthur, Hugh McFarlane, and many other CFA captains around my area, and who I know in Hugh's case has written to the Minister for Roads and Environment. But also it's been raised by the SES, who one particular SES branch went out that night and cleared 30 branches from across the roads, 30 episodes, and also the general community, people who were frightened and weren't able to evacuate, and wrote to both Craig Lapsley, the ministers, and myself, very, very concerned by their frightening experiences. The Moyne Shire has also raised the matter with myself and the member for Malvern during his visit to my electorate only a few weeks ago. Moyne Shire is seeking that DWELP initiate a basic permit process based on visual inspection to allow landowners to clear roadside reserves adjoining their property of all dead, fallen or non-native trees and vegetation. Now, the reason we need to think about this is things have changed, and I listen to the members across the chamber and hear them talk about their commitment to the environment. But the commitment to the environment I think we all genuinely do have, whatever political colour we come from, we all agree that we must look after the environment. But it's the walking the walk that really concerns me rather than just talking it. And when I see the history of people on the land who are not being involved in the consultation process, who actually understand how it really does work, I find that we're not really getting it right. And so this legislation, if it doesn't have consultation with the landholders or the custodians, the stewards, the people who have the stewardship of the land in their responsibility, then we're missing a very important factor. And I remember as a little girl, my dad's responsibility was to slash the roadsides for a safety perspective, and to, if there was a tree down, you actually got out there and you got the chainsaw and you chopped it up. My husband and I nowadays could no more do that than fly in the air, because we would be at risk of litigation if something went wrong. And it's putting us all into a really difficult position. We had a very tragic circumstances 3 years ago when a limb came down in the middle of the night in a very remote area, and when the locals did what they thought was the right thing and was the right thing, it ended up in tragedy with a death as a result of having to clear that roadside tree, and it was an awful situation. So when we had the St Patrick Day fires and we had the same sort of thing happen, those winds that caused all those trees to go down, I had friends of mine who were trapped in their property, and just by luck they owned a front-end loader. And the husband, Ken, actually drove the tractor, and Rosemary drove the car behind. There was quite a few cars. They were having a function at their place, and it was horrific. Then if they didn't have that front-end loader available to them, they actually wouldn't have got out, and they would have, it was a very could have been a tragic result. And that's not just one case, there's several cases in South West Coast. So when my dad would go and clear the roadside, we were doing our community responsible duty. Nowadays, the roadsides, because we don't have the resources to get departments to do it, and we've lost that culture of responsibility that every farmer felt, the roadsides have become incredibly overgrown. And it's not always native vegetation, and I'm certainly not advocating that we clear the roadsides to the detriment of the environment, but I think we've got that balance wrong. when we can't get community safety right, and that night we saw that. In fact, it was really lucky that those fires started in the middle of the night, which was quite frightening, but if we had had people evacuating, because the town of Woolsthorpe where I live, the evacuation notice never even got through, so people slept on not even knowing what was going on. If they had have been evacuated, it could have been mayhem. It could have been quite dangerous because there were so many limbs down and just nothing for people to realise. One fire truck actually hit a limb that night that was down across the road. So Moyne Shire are just desperately, as are the other shires, trying to say, come on guys, we've had a real tragedy in our area with this fire, and we're lucky to avoid the tragedy. It could have happened. It was a dreadful event, but no lives were lost. But was that an opportunity for us to say, let's work more closely on this? And I think this legislation, which looks at biodiversity, could actually stop us from actually doing things responsively. We need to be aware that the resources in the department are not abundant, and therefore we don't want to have just another excuse to say no, rather than looking at the situation individually and getting on with it. And using local knowledge like shires and farmers is one exact way of doing that. So as I say, I'm not advocating to remove all vegetation, but allow it to be maintained and controlled and improve safety for everyone while still achieving a positive environmental outcome. I also note that the Minister for Environment talked about her commitment to Parks Victoria and her contribution on the budget papers last sitting, and said under the previous government people were visiting parks to find dilapidated facilities, and in some cases not even a park ranger. Well, if we're really seriously keen about the environment, you know, when we're reviewing legislation and we're doing things like we are right now, we can't just continually ignore what we have in our responsibility. And she, in her contribution, blamed the former government for the dilapidation of the facilities. But in reality, it's still happening now in my electorate under her watch. And it was the Labor government that axed the full-time ranger position at Budgebim National Park and at the Tower Hill State Game Reserve, two positions put in place by the Napthine government. And I think, you know, when you look at the Liberal history, we've got a very proud history of looking after the environment, because we do understand that you do need to respect. As a farmer, there's one thing I've learned very, very profoundly, and that is you work with nature. You don't work against it, because it's always the smartest of the two. So, you know, when I look at what we've done as a Liberal party over the years, getting national parks listed, doing environmental legislation, some of the first environment legislation under the Hamer government, a long and very proud history of actually outcome-focused behaviours, not just talking the talk like I hear so much from the other side, saying they are friends of the farmer. Well, if you're friends of the farmer, have a look at how farmers are running their businesses. The margins are enormously tight. Probably that's an oxymoron. So tight that we are losing often many years. The cost of production last year in the dairy industry was greater than the product we were producing. So when you look at that, how can, as the VFF have said, how can we ask the farming community who will do the work on our behalves to actually take responsibility for the community good and the community benefit financially? They can't. There just isn't the margin. I really do try and share with absolute genuineness that we cannot keep squeezing farmers and asking them to produce more and more, and asking them to look after the custodianship of the environment for our community benefit. I mean, these guys are volunteers in the CFA, managing roadsides, getting bureaucracy, frustrations, and you know, they're just trying to do the right thing. They go in to try and get a permit to manage the side of the road from a fire management perspective, and they're just mucked around, whether it be with Vic Roads, whether it be with the CFA bureaucracy, whether it be with DWELP. It's just putting the challenge back on the community who are looking after that environment too greatly. So consider what the VFF are saying. They're absolutely right. When it's on private land or when they're trying to manage the roadsides, have a bit of consideration, because I think we're just pushing too hard. And like I say, we're all on the same page here. We want the environment managed better, but listen to those who do it every day from daylight till dusk, and they don't do it always for a lot of money, In fact, they'll do it whether they're getting money or not, because that's the responsibility they have taken on, both for the environment and, like the member for Eildon said, whether it be at a micro level in the soils or whether it be a macro level in the animals and the vegetation. So on that note, I would like to support again the comments of the VFF, and we need to